A woman abandoned her newborn daughter at the church door. The library clock showed 9:30 p.m. Grace scrubbed the floor vigorously, her heart pounding fast. Her eyes darted from side to side as if someone might appear at any moment. I need to finish quickly, she thought, wiping her sweaty forehead. Suddenly, an image invaded her mind. A cold night, 15 years ago. Grace, much younger, carried a bundle in her arms. She looked at the sleeping baby and felt tears streaming down. With trembling hands, she left the baby at the church door and ran away. Grace shook her head, returning to the present. Her hands clenched the mop tightly. I can't think about this now, she murmured to herself. While cleaning, her eyes fell on a forgotten newspaper on a table. The headline caught her eye: Police reopen cases of abandoned children. Grace felt her blood run cold. Her hands began to tremble so much that she dropped the bucket of water. Hey, Grace! Are you okay? Shouted a voice. It was Frank, the old doorman, entering the library. He looked concerned at Grace, who was as pale as paper. What happened, girl? You look like you've seen a ghost, said Frank, approaching. Grace opened her mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come out. She wanted to tell everything to Frank, her only friend. She wanted to tell him about the night she abandoned her daughter, about the fears she had carried for 15 years. Grace began, but was interrupted by the noise of the door opening. A girl about 15 years old ran in. She had long brown hair and lively eyes. Sorry. I forgot my notebook, she said, out of breath. Grace froze. The girl was the spitting image of herself when she was young. Her eyes filled with tears. It's okay, Lily, said Frank, smiling at the girl. Get what you need. Lily ran to one of the tables, grabbed a notebook, and turned to leave. Her eyes met Grace's for a moment. Thank you, said Lily, smiling, before running out. Grace stood still, feeling as if the world had stopped spinning. That girl, could it be? Grace, called Frank, touching her shoulder. Are you sure you're okay? Grace swallowed hard and forced a smile. Yes, Frank. Just tired. Frank didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press further. All right then. Don't stay too late, okay? Grace nodded, watching Frank walk away. As soon as she was alone, she collapsed into a chair. Her secret, hidden for so long, seemed on the verge of coming to light. And that girl, Lily. With trembling hands, Grace picked up the newspaper. The investigation, Lily, everything seemed to be coming together in a storm that threatened to destroy the life she had built. What am I going to do? Whispered Grace to herself, feeling the weight of 15 years of secrets on her shoulders. In the days that followed, Grace did everything she could to avoid Lily. Whenever the girl showed up at the library, Grace found an excuse to head to the storage room or clean another area. But it seemed that the more she tried to escape, the more Lily appeared. On a quiet afternoon, Grace was organizing books when she heard Lily's voice. Excuse me, can you help me find a book? Grace froze. She took a deep breath and turned around, forcing a smile. Of course, which book? While helping Lily, Grace couldn't stop looking at her. The same eyes, the same smile. It was like looking into a mirror of the past. That night, lying in bed, Grace couldn't sleep. Memories she had tried to bury for years came back with full force. Grace saw herself at 20, pregnant and scared. Her boyfriend had disappeared as soon as he found out about the pregnancy. Her very religious family had kicked her out. Alone and penniless, Grace spent her pregnancy in a shelter for women. When the baby was born, Grace thought the love she would feel would overcome everything. But as days passed, she felt only fear and despair. How would she take care of a baby on her own? How could she give her daughter a good life? That's when she made the most difficult decision of her life. Grace shook her head, returning to the present. Tears streamed down her face. The next day, at the library, Grace overheard two women talking. "Did you hear? Jack Harper is investigating old cases of abandoned children." "Really? Why?" "They say it's personal. Something to do with his adopted daughter." Grace's heart stopped. Jack Harper, Lily's father. Panic overtook her. What if they found out? What if Lily knew the truth? Grace ran to the bathroom and threw up. When she came out, she found Frank waiting for her. "Grace, what's going on? You've been acting strange." Grace opened her mouth to deny it, but suddenly she couldn't bear the burden alone anymore. "Frank, I did something terrible." Her voice was just a whisper. Frank took her to a quiet corner. "What is it, my dear?" With a trembling voice, Grace told him everything. The baby, the night at the church, the fear she had carried for 15 years. Frank listened in silence, his eyes full of compassion. When Grace finished, he held her hands. "Grace, you were young and scared. You can't blame yourself forever. But what if they find out? What if Lily knows?" Frank thought for a moment. "Maybe it's time to face the past, Grace. Running away will only make you suffer more." Grace shook her head, terrified. "I can't, Frank. They'll hate me. You don't know that. Sometimes, the truth sets you free." At that moment, Lily walked into the library. Her eyes met Grace's, and she smiled. Grace felt something change inside her. What if Frank was right? What if it was time to stop running? With her heart pounding, Grace decided. She would approach Lily. She wouldn't tell the truth, not yet. But she wouldn't run away anymore. "Hi, Lily," said Grace, approaching. "Need help finding a book today?" Lily smiled, surprised and happy with the attention. "I'd love to." As they walked between the shelves, Grace felt fear, but also a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to fix the mistakes of the past. But a voice in the back of her mind reminded her Jack Harper was investigating. Time was running out. And Grace knew that sooner or later, she would have to face the consequences of her decision from 15 years ago. In the weeks that followed, Grace and Lily developed a cautious friendship. Grace helped Lily with her school research, and Lily shared her day's events. For Grace, every moment was precious yet terrifying. One sunny afternoon, Lily arrived at the library, excited. "Grace, guess what? I got an A+ on the project you helped me with." Grace smiled, feeling a mix of pride and pain. "That's great, Lily. Your hard work paid off." As they chatted, the library door swung open. A tall man entered, his eyes scanning the room. Grace's blood ran cold. It was Jack Harper. "Dad!" Lily exclaimed, surprised. "What are you doing here?" Jack smiled at his daughter. "Just checking in to see if you're all right. And also..." His gaze shifted to Grace. "I have some questions." Grace felt her legs tremble. Can I help you? Jack approached, his stare intense. I'm investigating some old cases. How long have you been working here, Miss Sullivan? Grace Sullivan, she replied, her mouth dry. About 12 years. Jack jotted something down in a notepad. And before that? Grace hesitated. I worked in another city. Which city? Grace's heart pounded so loudly she feared it could be heard. I'm sorry, but may I ask what this investigation is about? Jack studied her for a moment. I'm reopening cases of abandoned children. Specifically, one from 15 years ago. Grace felt the world spin. She leaned on the table, trying not to faint. Miss Sullivan, are you all right? Jack asked, frowning. Just a bit dizzy. I haven't eaten today, Grace lied. Concerned, Lily brought Grace a glass of water. Maybe you should rest a bit. Jack nodded. Well, I'll come back another day to continue our conversation. Thank you for your time, Miss Sullivan. As soon as Jack left, Grace rushed to the bathroom and vomited. Fear consumed her. Jack was close, too close to the truth. When she emerged, Frank was waiting. I saw what happened, he whispered. Grace, you need to calm down. It's becoming obvious something is wrong. Grace nodded, trembling. I know, Frank. But I don't know what to do. At that moment, Michael, a regular at the library, approached. Sorry to interrupt, he said, smiling shyly. I just wanted to thank you for the book recommendation, Grace. It was excellent. Grace forced a smile. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Michael. Michael hesitated, as if wanting to say more. Grace. I was wondering, would you like to have coffee sometime? The question took Grace by surprise. It had been years since anyone had asked her out. I don't know, Michael. My life is complicated right now. I understand, Michael said, looking disappointed. Well, the invitation stands if you change your mind. As Michael walked away, Frank gave an encouraging smile. Maybe it would be good for you, Grace. To get out a little, distract yourself. Grace shook her head. I can't, Frank. Not with everything that's going on. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Grace could barely concentrate, every noise made her jump. At night, at home, Grace couldn't sleep. Jack's questions echoed in her mind. He was close, so close to uncovering everything. She got up and went to the drawer where she kept the only photo of her newborn daughter. Looking at the photo, tears began to fall. Forgive me, Grace whispered. Please forgive me. In that moment, Grace made a decision. Tomorrow, she would tell Lily everything. She could no longer live with this secret. But as the sun rose, bringing a new day, fear returned with full force. What if Lily hated her? What if Jack arrested her? With trembling hands, Grace prepared for another day at the library. Today would be the day. She would tell Lily the truth. But upon arriving at the library, Grace was greeted by an excited and happy Lily. Grace, you won't believe it. My parents are taking me on a surprise trip. Grace's heart sank. Once again, fate seemed to delay her confession. That's wonderful, Lily, Grace forced a smile. Have fun. As she watched Lily leave, bouncing with excitement, Grace felt the weight of her secret heavier than ever. How much longer could she hold on before everything collapsed? Days dragged on for Grace. Every moment in the library was torture. She flinched every time the door opened, fearing Jack Harper might walk in. One gray morning, her worst suspicions were confirmed. Jack returned, his face stern and determined. "Mrs. Sullivan, can we talk?" he asked, his tone making it clear it wasn't a request. Grace nodded, her legs wobbly. They sat at a secluded table. "I've been investigating," Jack began. "And some things don't add up. You said you came from another town, but there are no records of you anywhere before Millbrook." Grace felt her blood chill. I had trouble with documents. Lost a lot during a move." Jack looked at her suspiciously. "You know, it's funny. The case I'm investigating, about a child abandoned 15 years ago, happened exactly when you arrived in town." Grace clasped her hands under the table, trying to control the tremor. "It must be a coincidence," she murmured. "Maybe," Jack said, not breaking his gaze. "Or maybe you know more than you're saying." At that moment, Frank appeared. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, looking worried at Grace. Jack stood up. "For now, yes. But I'll be back, Mrs. Sullivan. We have a lot to discuss." As soon as Jack left, Grace collapsed into the chair, trembling. "Grace, you need to tell the truth," Frank said gently. "I can't, Frank," she whispered. "I'll lose everything. Lily will hate me." Frank sighed. "What if they find out another way?" "It'll be worse." Grace shook her head in panic. "I need to leave. Get out of town." "And run again?" Frank questioned. "How long, Grace?" Before she could answer, Michael appeared. "Hi, Grace," he smiled. "I've been thinking about what you said about your life being complicated. How about a coffee right here in the library? Just as friends." Grace looked at Michael, his kind smile, his worried eyes. For a moment, she imagined what it would be like to have someone to share her burden with. "All right," she said, surprising herself. "A coffee would be good." As they talked, Grace felt some of the weight on her shoulders lighten. Michael was funny and kind. For the first time in weeks, she laughed for real. But the feeling of peace was short-lived. Lily returned from her trip, more curious than ever about her origins. "Grace, have you ever wanted to know about your real parents?" Lily asked one day, suddenly. Grace almost dropped the book she was carrying. "Why do you ask?" Lily shrugged. "Just curious. Sometimes I think about my biological mother. Why did she leave me? Does she regret it?" Each word was like a knife in Grace's heart. "I'm sure she had her reasons," she said, her voice choked. That night, Grace had a terrible nightmare. She was back on that cold night, leaving the baby at the church. But this time, adult Lily appeared, her eyes filled with hate. "How could you abandon me?" the dream Lily screamed. "I hate you." Grace woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. She looked at the clock, 3 a.m. Knowing she couldn't sleep anymore, she got up and went to the window. The street was deserted, lit only by street lamps. Grace found herself thinking about running away, grabbing her things and disappearing into the night, starting anew somewhere else. But then she thought of Lily, Frank, even Michael. Could she leave everything behind again? With a heavy heart, Grace made a decision. She wouldn't run. She would stay and face the consequences of her actions, whatever they were. When the sun rose, bringing a new day, Grace felt strangely calm. Today would be the day. She would tell Lily everything. But fate had other plans. When she arrived at the library, Grace found Lily in tears. "What happened?" Grace asked, alarmed. Between sobs, Lily told her that she had overheard a nasty fight between her adoptive parents. They were arguing about telling her something important. "I think it has to do with my adoption," Lily said, wiping away tears. "But they don't want to tell me. Why does everyone hide things from me?" Grace felt as if the ground was vanishing beneath her feet. Everything was crumbling. Her secrets, the Harper's secrets. And in the middle of it all, Lily, innocent and hurt. "Sometimes people hide things thinking they're protecting those they love," Grace said softly, knowing she spoke of the Harpers as much as herself. Lily looked at Grace, her eyes full of trust. "You would never hide anything from me, would you, Grace?" The question hit Grace like a punch. She opened her mouth, ready to tell everything. But the words got stuck in her throat. "Never," she finally said, feeling the weight of the lie crush her heart. As she embraced Lily, comforting her, Grace knew she was on the edge of a precipice. Her secrets were about to come to light. And when they did, nothing would ever be the same again. The day dawned cloudy in Millbrook, mirroring Grace's gloomy mood. She had barely slept, tormented by nightmares and worries. Upon arriving at the library, she noticed something different in the air. People whispered and cast glances her way. Frank called her aside as soon as she entered. "Grace, Jack was here earlier." He seemed determined. Grace's heart raced. "What did he want?" "He didn't say. But he left this for you." Frank handed her an envelope. With trembling hands, Grace opened it. Inside was a faded old photo. She recognized it immediately. It was her, 15 years younger, pregnant, entering the local church. "My God," she whispered, feeling her legs weaken. "What is it?" Frank asked, concerned. Grace showed him the photo. "He knows, Frank. Jack has found out everything." At that moment, the library door opened. Jack walked in, his eyes fixed on Grace. "Mrs. Sullivan, we need to talk. Now." Grace nodded, resigned. They went to a private room. Jack threw more photos on the table. "I found these in the church archives." "It's you, isn't it? 15 years ago, pregnant." Grace didn't answer, her eyes fixed on the images from her past. "Why did you lie? Why did you hide that you abandoned a child?" Jack's words were harsh, accusatory. Grace felt tears forming. I was scared. Alone. I couldn't take care of a baby." "And Lily? Did you know she was your daughter all this time?" Grace shook her head. "I suspected, but wasn't sure." Jack slammed his hand on the table, furious. "How could you? To be close to her, pretending to just be a friend?" "I wanted to tell her," Grace sobbed. "But I was afraid. Afraid of losing everything." "And now you will lose," Jack said coldly. "I'll tell everything to Lily. And you'll face the legal consequences of your actions." Grace felt her world crumbling. Everything she feared was happening. When she left the room, she saw Lily arriving at the library. The girl smiled at her, oblivious to the storm about to hit her. "Grace, I have something to tell you." But before Lily could continue, Jack interrupted. Lily, let's go home. We have something important to discuss. Grace watched father and daughter leave, knowing her life would soon change forever. The following hours were a blur. Grace wandered through the library in shock, unable to focus on any task. Michael appeared at the end of the day, his smile fading as he saw Grace's state. What happened? You look terrible. Grace almost laughed at the irony. My life is falling apart, Michael. And it's all my fault. Concerned, Michael took her to get some coffee. On the way, they passed the central square. Grace saw Lily sitting on a bench, crying, while the Harpers talked animatedly. My God, Grace murmured. They told her. Told her what? Michael asked, confused. Grace looked at him, tired of lying. That I'm her biological mother. That I abandoned her 15 years ago. Michael was shocked. Grace. I had no idea. Nobody did, she said bitterly. And now everyone will know. Back at the library, Grace found Frank. The old doorman hugged her tightly. What are you going to do now, my dear? Grace shook her head, lost. I don't know, Frank. Maybe it's time to leave. And run away again? Frank asked gently. Or face it head on. Before Grace could answer, Lily stormed into the library. Her eyes, red from crying, met Grace's. Is it true? Lily asked, her voice trembling. Are you my mother? The moment Grace feared most had arrived. She looked at her daughter, seeing all the pain and confusion her actions had caused. Yes, Grace answered, her voice nearly a whisper. It's true. Lily stood still, processing the information. Then, without a word, she turned and ran off. Lily, wait. Grace called out, running after her. But it was too late. Lily had disappeared into the night, leaving Grace on the brink of an abyss of her own making. Back in the library, Grace collapsed into a chair, exhausted and defeated. What have I done? She murmured, tears streaming freely. How could I mess everything up like this? Frank placed a hand on her shoulder, offering silent comfort. Michael, still stunned by the revelation, stayed close by, unsure of what to say or do. Grace knew the storm was just beginning. The truth was exposed, and now she would have to face the consequences of 15 years of secrets and lies. The morning after the revelation, Grace arrived at the library with a heavy heart. Normally a refuge, the building now felt like a prison. Every corner held a memory of Lily, every book a reminder of their conversations. Frank greeted her with a worried look. How are you, my dear? Grace just shook her head, unable to put into words the whirlwind of emotions she was feeling. She had barely sat down when Jack Harper entered, his face a mask of determination. We need to talk, now, he said, his voice making it clear it was not a request. Grace followed him to a private room, feeling as if she were walking to her own execution. Jack wasted no time on preliminaries. I found this, he said, throwing an envelope on the table. Inside were hospital records from 15 years ago. Grace's name was there, along with details of Lily's birth. How? Grace began, but Jack interrupted her. It doesn't matter how. What matters is that I now have concrete evidence. You abandoned Lily and then lied to us all. Tears welled up in Grace's eyes. Jack, please, let me explain. Explain what? He countered. How could you approach Lily, pretending to be just a friend? How could you lie for so long? Each word felt like a stab. Grace tried to speak, to defend herself, but the words caught in her throat. I'm taking this to the police, Jack continued. You will answer for your actions. Fear gripped Grace. Wait, she pleaded. Please, let me talk to Lily first. Explained everything to her. Jack stared at her for a long moment. Stay away from my daughter, he finally said, his voice laden with threat. When he left, Grace collapsed into the chair, trembling. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Grace tried to work, but everyone who entered seemed to look at her differently. Did everyone already know? By late afternoon, Michael appeared. His usual smile vanished upon seeing Grace's state. Hey, what happened? He asked, genuinely concerned. Grace hesitated. Part of her wanted to tell everything, to unburden herself. But another part feared driving away the only person who still treated her normally. It's complicated, she finally replied. Michael nodded, not pressing her. If you need to talk, I'm here, he offered. Grace felt a wave of gratitude. Thank you, Michael. That means a lot. As the library closed, Grace found herself reluctant to go home. The thought of facing the silence of her apartment, alone with her thoughts, was daunting. Then she saw Lily across the street. The girl looked lost, her eyes red from crying. Without thinking, Grace crossed the street. Lily, she called softly. Lily turned, her eyes widening upon seeing Grace. For a moment, they stood there, face to face, the weight of 15 years of secrets between them. Why? Lily finally asked, her voice choked. Why did you abandon me? The question Grace feared most. She took a deep breath, knowing this moment would define everything. I was young, I was scared, Grace began. I thought you would have a better life without me. But I've regretted it every day since then. Lily absorbed the words, her face a mixture of emotions. And when you found me here? Why didn't you say anything? Tears streamed down Grace's face. I wanted to. God knows I wanted to. But I was so afraid of losing you again. A heavy silence fell between them. Grace could see the internal struggle in Lily's eyes, anger, confusion, but also a spark of something more. Understanding? Maybe even forgiveness? I need time, Lily finally said. To think, to understand all this. Grace nodded, her heart heavy but with a small spark of hope. I understand. I'll be here if you want to talk. As she watched Lily walk away, Grace knew she was on the brink of an abyss. The net had closed, the truth was laid bare. Now, all that remained was to face the consequences of 15 years of secrets and hope that, somehow, there was a path to redemption. In the days following her conversation with Lily, Grace lived in a state of constant anxiety. Every time the library door opened, she expected to see Jack Harper or a police officer. On a rainy morning, her wait ended. Jack entered, accompanied by a man in a suit. Grace Sullivan, the man said, showing a badge. I'm Detective Roberts. We need you to come with us to the station. Grace felt the ground disappear beneath her. Frank, who had been watching everything, approached. Does she need a lawyer? The detective nodded. It would be advisable. On the way to the station, Grace watched her life in Millbrook pass by the car window. 15 years of a life built on lies, crumbling. In the interrogation room, Grace heard the charges. Child abandonment. Identity fraud. Her head spun. "Why did you decide to come back to Millbrook?" the detective asked. Grace took a deep breath. "I didn't know Lily was here. It was a coincidence." "A coincidence?" Jack interrupted, incredulous. "You've been working near her for months." "I know," Grace said, tears streaming down her face. "When I realized who she was, I panicked. I wanted to tell, but you chose to keep lying," Jack finished, bitterly. The interrogation lasted for hours. By the end, Grace felt exhausted and defeated. As she left the station, she found Michael waiting. "Frank told me," he said. "Are you okay?" Grace shook her head. "I don't think anything will be okay now." Michael drove her home. On the way, they passed the Harper's house. Grace saw Lily at the window, her gaze distant. "They're going to arrest me, Michael," Grace whispered. "I'm going to lose everything." Michael held her hand. "We'll think of something. You're not alone in this." At home, Grace found several messages on her answering machine. People canceling her cleaning services, voices full of disapproval. The news had already spread. That night, unable to sleep, Grace went to the small box where she kept the only mementos of baby Lily. A lock of hair, a hospital bracelet. Treasures from a life she had thrown away. The phone rang, startling her. It was Helen Harper, Lily's adoptive mother. "How could you?" Helen said, her voice shaking with anger. "Lily is devastated. Jack wants to move. You've destroyed our family." Grace tried to respond, to explain, but Helen had already hung up. Helen's words echoed in her mind. Had she really destroyed everything? Not just her life, but the Harpers, Lily's? The next morning, Grace woke to loud knocks at the door. It was Jack. "I came to tell you we're moving," he said bluntly. "Far away from here. Away from you." "Jack, please," Grace pleaded. "Don't take Lily from me. Not now that." "What?" Jack exploded. "That you finally decided to be a mother? 15 years too late, don't you think?" He left, leaving Grace devastated. Hours later, sitting in the empty library Frank had given her the day off, Grace heard the door open. It was Lily. "Are you leaving?" Grace asked, dreading the answer. Lily nodded. "Dad thinks it's best." Mom agrees. "And you? What do you think?" Lily hesitated. "I don't know. Everything's so confusing." Grace wanted to hug her, to say everything would be okay. But she knew she had no right. "Lily, I know I've made mistakes. A lot. But I want you to know that I love you. I always have." Lily looked at her, tears filling her eyes. "Then why did you abandon me?" The question hung in the air, heavy, painful. Grace opened her mouth to respond, but Lily was already leaving. "Goodbye, Grace," she said softly. Grace sat there, feeling as if her heart was being torn out. Everything she feared was happening. Lily was leaving. Her chance to fix things, to be a mother, was disappearing. In that moment, Grace realized she had reached the breaking point. Her lies, her fears, all had culminated in this moment. And now, she was about to lose everything. The day after Lily's visit dawned gray in Millbrook. Grace arrived at the library earlier than usual, seeking refuge in the familiar routine. But even this comfort was denied to her. "Grace," Frank called, his face serious. "The library board wants to speak with you." Grace's heart sank. She knew what was coming. In the meeting room, she faced accusatory glances. The board president got straight to the point. "Due to recent revelations, we think it's best to terminate your contract." Grace nodded, too drained to argue. In a matter of minutes, 15 years of work ended with a signature on a paper. Leaving the library for the last time as an employee, Grace felt lost. The streets of Millbrook, once welcoming, now seemed hostile. Whispers and stares followed her wherever she went. At home, loneliness engulfed her. The phone, previously silent, now rang incessantly. Reporters wanting her side of the story, lawyers offering their services, and occasionally, a familiar voice expressing disappointment. It was one of these calls that brought devastating news. An old church friend informed her that the Harpers had left that morning. They took Lily away without even a goodbye. Grace collapsed on the sofa, tears finally cascading down. She had lost everything: her job, her reputation, and now, any chance of reconnecting with Lily. A knock at the door snapped her out of her stupor. It was Michael, carrying bags of groceries. "I thought you might need something," he said gently. Grace let him in, grateful for the company. As Michael made tea, she watched him, thoughtful. "Why are you still here?" she finally asked. "Everyone else has abandoned me." Michael paused, considering the question. "Because I believe there's more to your story than people are willing to hear." His words touched something deep within Grace. For the first time in days, she felt a spark of hope. They talked for hours. Grace shared everything: her troubled youth, the abandonment, the years of regret. Michael listened without judgment, offering only understanding and support. When he finally left, Grace felt lighter. Not resolved, but less alone. The next morning, determined to fight, Grace sought out a lawyer. She knew she faced charges, but was determined to share her side of the story. The lawyer was blunt. "It will be tough, Miss Sullivan. Public opinion is not in your favor." "I know," Grace replied. "But I need to try. For Lily." As they discussed legal strategies, Grace's phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Grace?" Lily's voice trembled on the other line. Grace nearly dropped the phone. "Lily? Are you okay? Where are you?" "We're in another state," Lily hesitated. "I just wanted to hear your voice." The conversation was brief and tense, but for Grace, it was like water in the desert. "Can I call you again?" Lily asked before hanging up. "Of course, my love. Always." That call changed something in Grace. It reignited her determination. In the days that followed, Grace worked tirelessly with her lawyer. They prepared her defense, gathered witnesses of her character. Frank offered to testify on her behalf, as did Michael. But not all news was good. One afternoon, Grace received a summons. The Harpers were filing a restraining order, preventing her from having any contact with Lily. The blow was hard, but Grace refused to give up. If there was even a small chance of being part of Lily's life, she would fight for it. One night, exhausted from reviewing legal documents, Grace went for a walk. Her steps led her to the church where, 15 years earlier, she had left Lily. Standing in front of the building, Grace felt the weight of her actions like never before. But she also felt something else: a growing resolve. "I won't give up," she whispered to the night. Not this time. Returning home, Grace found Michael waiting at her door. "I came to see how you are," he said. Grace looked at him, really looked, and saw something she had overlooked before. Loyalty, compassion, and perhaps something more. "I'm fighting," she replied honestly. "And I'll keep fighting." Michael smiled, taking her hand. "And I'll be here, by your side." In that moment, amid the chaos her life had become, Grace felt a thread of hope. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with legal and emotional obstacles. But for the first time since the truth came out, she didn't feel alone. With Michael by her side, the support of Frank, and the possibility of reconnecting with Lily, Grace prepared to face whatever came. The future was uncertain, but she was determined to fight for her redemption, for her place in Lily's life, and for the chance to right the wrongs of the past. Autumn arrived in Millbrook, bringing with it a chill that seemed to seep into Grace's bones. Weeks had passed since the Harpers left, and each day was a new battle. The legal process trudged on, moving at a frustratingly slow pace. Grace spent hours with her lawyer, sifting through every detail of her life. The charges were serious: abandonment of a vulnerable person, identity fraud. The possibility of prison loomed over her like a dark cloud. Lily's calls, once a beacon of hope, became less frequent. Grace began to wonder if the Harpers had discovered their secret communications. One particularly cold morning, Grace received devastating news. Her lawyer informed her that the judge had granted the restraining order requested by the Harpers. Officially, she was now prohibited from any contact with Lily. The blow was too much to bear. Grace felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Everything she had been fighting for seemed to be crumbling. That night, alone at home, Grace faced her inner demons. Guilt, regret, and a sense of failure consumed her. For the first time, she allowed herself to fully sink into the darkness of her thoughts. Hours passed. Grace remained seated in the dark, motionless, with dried tears on her face. The phone rang several times, but she didn't answer. The outside world felt distant, unreal. It was Frank who finally found her. Concerned about her absence in town, he used the spare key Grace had given him years ago. "My God, Grace," he murmured when he saw her. "What happened?" Grace looked at him, her eyes dull. "It's over, Frank. I've lost Lily. I've lost everything." Frank sat down beside her, his wrinkled face full of concern. "No, my dear. While there's life, there's hope." But Grace shook her head. "What hope? I'm a criminal in the eyes of the law. An outcast in this town. And now, I can't even talk to my own daughter." Frank was silent for a moment, then said softly, "You know, this reminds me of a story from the Bible." Grace almost laughed. "Frank, I don't think Bible stories are going to help right now." "Listen," he insisted. "Do you remember Job? He lost everything: family, wealth, health. He was at rock bottom, just like you. But he didn't give up on his faith." Grace looked at him, skeptical. "And what does that have to do with me?" "Everything," Frank replied. "Because even in his darkest moment, Job didn't lose hope. And in the end, he was rewarded." Frank's words, though simple, touched something in Grace. A small spark of something she thought she had lost: faith. "I'm not saying it will be easy," Frank continued. "But you're stronger than you think, Grace. And you're not alone in this fight." As if to prove his point, the phone rang again. This time, Grace answered. It was Michael. "Grace, thank God," he said, relieved. "I've been trying to reach you all day. Are you okay?" The concern in his voice warmed Grace's heart. "I am now," she replied softly. In the days that followed, Grace slowly emerged from her depression. With Frank and Michael's support, she found the strength to keep going. She reconnected with her lawyer, determined to fight the restraining order. She started looking for work, facing the stares and whispers of the town. One afternoon, while walking through the park, Grace saw a young mother with her daughter. For a moment, she imagined herself in that woman's place, with Lily by her side. The pain was intense, but there was something else now: determination. "I'm going to fix this," Grace murmured to herself. "Somehow, I'll make things right." That night, for the first time in weeks, Grace slept without nightmares. At rock bottom, she had found something unexpected: the strength to rise again. The road ahead was still long and difficult, but Grace was ready to face it. With renewed faith and the support of those who had stood by her, she would take the first step toward redemption. A year had passed since that dark night when Grace hit rock bottom. Spring had arrived in Millbrook, bringing with it a promise of renewal. Grace walked through the town park, the same place where, months ago, she had made a silent vow to make things right. Her face, once marked by the weight of guilt, now carried a newfound serenity. As she sat on a bench, she reflected on the journey of the past year. It had been months of legal battles, therapy sessions, and, above all, profound inner work. The court case was over. Grace faced the consequences of her actions, completing community service and paying fines. But the real challenge was regaining the trust of the community. Day by day, Grace worked tirelessly. She volunteered at shelters, helped with literacy programs, and slowly, people began to see beyond her past mistakes. Frank and Michael stood by her side, pillars of support during her most difficult moments. Her friendship with Michael blossomed into something deeper, a love built on understanding and forgiveness. But the greatest miracle came from where Grace least expected. Lily, now 16, had reached out. The first conversations were tense, full of difficult questions and raw emotions. But with patience and honesty, mother and daughter began to rebuild their relationship. Now, sitting on that bench, Grace awaited the moment that would change everything. Lily was coming to visit her, with the reluctant permission of the Harpers. When she saw Lily approaching, Grace's heart raced. Her daughter, so grown, so beautiful, was walking towards her. "Hi," Lily said softly, sitting beside Grace. "Hi, sweetheart," Grace replied, her voice thick with emotion. For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of 15 years of separation between them. "You know," Lily began, "for a long time, I hated you." Grace felt the tears welling up, but she let Lily continue. "I didn't understand how a mother could abandon her daughter. But then, I started to think about what it must have been like for you. Young, scared, alone." Grace looked at her daughter, seeing a wisdom beyond her years. "Lily, Grace started, but Lily gently interrupted her. "Let me finish. I realized that hating you was only hurting me. And that maybe it was time to try to understand and forgive." The words hit Grace like a wave, washing away years of guilt and regret. "Oh, Lily," she sobbed, "I'm so sorry. Every day I regretted leaving you. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." Lily took Grace's hand, tears streaming down her face as well. "I know, Mom. I know now. In that moment, something healed between them. It wasn't a fairy tale happy ending. There was still much to work on, much to rebuild. But it was a beginning. A new beginning for both of them. They talked for hours, sharing stories, dreams, and fears. As the sun began to set, Lily looked at Grace with a shy smile. I think I'd like to get to know you better. If you want. Grace felt her heart overflow with joy. More than anything in the world, sweetheart. As they walked together through the park, Grace saw Michael and Frank approaching. Their faces lit up as they saw mother and daughter side by side. In that moment, surrounded by those who loved her, who forgave her, and who believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself, Grace felt a peace she had never experienced before. She looked up at the sky, the sunset painting the clouds pink and gold, and whispered a prayer of gratitude. For second chances, for forgiveness, for love. Grace knew that the road ahead would still be challenging. There were wounds to heal, trust to rebuild. But for the first time in 15 years, she wasn't afraid of the future. Because now she understood. The echoes of silence that had haunted her for so long weren't an end, but a beginning. A beginning of redemption, of love, and of a reunited family. And as the group walked together, their laughter echoing through the park, Grace knew she was finally home. Not in a place, but with the people around her. In the daughter she had found again, in the love she had discovered, and in the strength she had found within herself. The silence had been broken. And in its place, a new melody was beginning, a melody of hope, forgiveness, and unconditional